In this video session, we'll understand more about web forms. In our previous video session, we have already understood that web forms have an extension of .aspx. Now, in this web form, if you can look at this, the default .aspx web form already got installed or already got created as soon as you opened your first web application in ASP.NET. That is, you did not created this web form by yourself. It automatically got generated by Visual Studio 2010. So now if you can look at this source code in this default.aspx page, this code is not the C# code which is written by the user. Rather, it is automatically generated code which is the basic HTML which tells the presentation and how your ASP.NET web application looks when it loads first onto the screen. So this is just the designer code which is automatically generated by Visual Studio. So it is basic HTML, nothing to do with C#. So where we have to write our C# code, or where we would write our hardcode coding in this ASP.NET web application. So we'll be writing that in the code behind file. Now where do you find your code behind file? Now as soon as you find this default.aspx page present inside this solution explorer, when you expand this default.aspx, you would find two files inside it. The first one is default.aspx.cs, which is the code behind file. So if you open this file, this is the code behind file where the user will write his or her code associated with that particular project. So supposedly you want to do something, you want to fire up an event as soon as the page loads, so you would write that code inside this page load event. So whatever you want to do when the page loads would be written inside this particular event, page load event, which is present inside the .cs file. Why .cs? Because we'd be writing our code in the C# language, programming language. If we were to write our code in Visual Basic, then the extension would have been default.aspx.vb. So there can be many events which would be fired using our .cs file. Supposedly you want to generate an event on the button click. Suppose you want to do something as soon as the user clicks the button. So just click the button twice and just look at this. The button click event has been generated. And what is this button 1? Button 1 is nothing but the ID of the button you dragged and dropped from the toolbox. So whenever you have to reference a particular control, the control has got a particular ID associated with itself, so that you can refer to that particular control using its ID. So button 1 is nothing but the ID of the button control which you dragged and dropped from the toolbox. So this is how you write code in C#, which is done inside the code behind file. The next file is the default.aspx.designer.cs file. Now what is this file? Now as soon as you would so let's open our default.aspx page. Now as soon as you would move to the designer page, and we have dragged and dropped a button control. Let's do that. It got disappeared somehow. So we had this button control over here, and what we did was we changed the text property of the button to click me. So let's do that. Okay, so now the text property of this button control has changed from button to click me. Now as soon as you dragged and dropped this button control onto your web application, this particular button control got declared somewhere inside our web application. Now where did this button control got declared? This button control got declared inside the designer file, which was automatically generated when we dragged and dropped this particular button control onto our web page. So let's open this designer file. Now if you look at this you can see that this button 1, which is the ID of our button control which we dragged and dropped from the toolbox, this is declared as a variable of the type button, and this button is nothing but a class, and this button 1 is nothing but a variable of the type class button. So all these controls are declared inside the designer file, which automatically gets generated as soon as you drag and drop a control to your web application, that is to your default.aspx page. So, and one thing you must understand here is that you must not change the code written inside the designer file, because this particular code is automatically generated by .NET framework, and once you change explicitly the code written inside this particular file, your application would not work in the desired manner. That is, it would behave weird and it would not behave in the manner it is supposed to do. So always remember that you don't have to change the auto-generated code written inside the designer file. Now one question arises here is that how .NET Framework knows that what code behind file is associated with this particular application, which is default.aspx, which means that how will you link this default.aspx page to its respective code behind file. Now that is done by using this add page directive. If you can just look at here, we have an add page directive here, and it has got an attribute code behind. This attribute code behind tells the .NET Framework that what code behind file is associated with this particular application, which is default.aspx, so that it knows that default.aspx.cs is the code behind file which is associated with this particular application or the project default.aspx. So through with the fundamentals of a web application and how you create a web application, how you can use controls and how you can change its properties, we are through with all those things, and we'll explore more about the ASP.NET web applications in our next video session.